So congratulations, your offer on a house got accepted, you're under contract, everything's rocking and rolling, but then, wait a minute, hold on a second. Oh my gosh, the house didn't appraise. So what are your options? What if you're a buyer? Or what if you're a seller? Next up, I'm talking about all those options. What can you do if a house doesn't appraise? If you're a seller or a buyer, that's coming up next. Hey, so what's going on, everybody? It's Bob Dzienis from eXp Realty here in Bergen County and Northern New Jersey. Thanks so much for joining me on my channel today. I really appreciate it. And if you're interested in real estate information, maybe community information, or just want to know about various real estate topics here in Bergen County or Northern New Jersey, make sure you click that subscribe button below. Also click the bell to be notified of new videos I post every Friday. Also, if you like what you see today, go ahead and give me a like because it helps grow the channel and it helps support the channel. So I really appreciate you liking and subscribing. All right, so today I'm talking about a pretty hot topic, especially in this crazy seller's market that we're in this COVID world right now. And that's about the creative ways that buyers are trying to get offers accepted with really low inventory right now and jacked up prices. And one of the aspects that people are considering, especially home buyers, is really, are there ways for me to be creative with the appraisal aspect of an offer? So if I do have to get a mortgage, the bank is 99% likely, there might be some instances where it's not the case, to get an appraisal done on a house. Because basically the bank wants to know, is the value there of what we are going to lend on for that house? Appraisals are hit or miss. Some are coming in no problem because of just the way the market conditions have been. And then some houses have actually been under appraising. And part of that is because sellers are probably overpricing a little bit, thinking, hey, I can try to get as much money as possible in this market. But appraisers are actually pretty savvy to what's going on, and so they're utilizing their expertise to be as fair as possible in this market. So if a house under appraises, what are your options as a seller? What are your options as a buyer? That's what I want to talk through today. So like I said before, if you have a mortgage, you're getting a mortgage as part of your offer, you're most likely going to need an appraisal done. But I've had a couple of deals recently where the bank didn't require it just because of the way that the market is right now. And right now I'm filming this in May of 2021. We're still in this COVID market. We've got inflated prices and low inventory. It's the perfect seller's market right now. And as offers are being made on home, people are looking for creative ways to get their offer accepted. And part of that is figuring out what things can I do potentially with the appraisal that might make my offer more attractive to a seller. And before we get into the appraisal aspect, I just want to mention, there's three aspects to a home sale. Like when a house goes on the market, a home has to sell 3 times. And so let me explain what that means. So let's say you're a buyer, you see a house, you want to make an offer on it. You negotiate an offer price with the seller or the listing agent. So that's the first time a house has to sell. The second time a house has to sell is through the inspection phase. So your offer gets accepted, you kind of start making your way down the path. You go into attorney review here in New Jersey, where the attorneys go back and forth and finalize aspects of the contract. And then you get into something called under contract. So agreement is on both sides, and now you're under contract. This is where the inspection phase happens, and this is where the second time your house has to sell is. It's done during the inspection phase. And when I say it has to sell this is an opportunity for a buyer and a seller to possibly renegotiate if anything pops up in an inspection report. The third time a house has to sell is through the appraisal phase. So you're still under contract, you've gotten past the inspection, and now you're getting closer to the actual closing date itself. If you have a loan, you're going to have an appraisal done 9 times out of 10. So what if the appraisal is done and the appraisal comes in low, meaning the house is not appraising based on market value? This then becomes the third time the house has to sell, where another negotiation has to happen. So your offer price could be impacted by the inspection, and then it can also be impacted by the appraisal as well if it does not come in at the appraised value. So if you're a buyer, you have some opportunity to possibly get some credits or get maybe a lower price for the home. And if you're a seller, you have to keep that in mind as well, right? So if the price, and maybe you've tried to get more money for the house, maybe you've raised the price, the offering price, for instance, you might not get that actual offer price because of the inspection, because of the appraisal. So you want to keep that in mind as well. And the other thing with an appraisal is you're pretty far down the path at that point. So you've gone through the inspection, you're now in underwriting with your lender, you're also in this appraisal phase, you're pretty close at that point to the closing table. And you have to kind of weigh those risks as a seller and a buyer. You know, if there's not an agreement at that point, will you walk away as a seller or a buyer? Or will you try to come up with some kind of common ground someplace to make the deal actually happen? All right, so let's talk about some of the areas where it's important to discuss the appraisal. And I personally think it's important to start thinking about it if you're a buyer or a seller in the very beginning stages before the house is actually on the market. So if you're a buyer, it's definitely questions I want to ask in a buyer's consultation. And if you're a seller, part of that is thinking about price and location and condition, which are the three factors that sell a home. Like, how willing are you to renegotiate during those other phases if you get a house under contract? When I work with a buyer, in the buyer's consultation, a lot of the questions I want to find out is kind of your risk tolerance. Are you willing to front any cash potentially, whether in your initial offer, maybe for instance for the appraisal, if a house under appraises, would you throw some money potentially at the deal to make the deal actually happen? Or would you have some funds set aside so if we do get an offer accepted and we go through the inspection and then we're at the appraisal phase and the house under appraises, would you throw some cash potentially there? You know, sometimes you don't want to put all your cards out, right? Maybe a little bit just to say to the seller, I'm willing to do this, but when you get to that phase of the actual deal, are you willing to maybe throw out a little bit more cash? You know, what is your risk tolerance, and just kind of weighing those pros and cons, really kind of important. I'd want to understand that because this is a very competitive market. So I try to help you look at some creative ways to get your offer accepted. And part of that is, how much are you willing to flex? Really important first phase is that buyer's consultation, just to kind of understand, you know, your risk tolerance. What are you willing to do? How high are you willing to go, if at all? Nobody says you have to. And if you're not, we'll have to look for other creative ways. So the next thing to consider, especially when it comes to an appraisal, is putting some kind of language in your actual offer on a home. So if I know up front that you're willing to maybe, you know what, you say, okay, if the house under appraises, I'm willing to put in $5,000, and you put that in your initial offer, sometimes that can actually put you in a better light to the seller, because you're saying to the seller, hey, look, I'm willing to work with you. I'll shell out a little bit of money if the house does under appraise. So that's something we could work on as we're putting in an offer, is to figure out, all right, how much would you want to state up front if you are willing to work with the seller if it under appraises? Would you put in $5,000? Would you put in $10,000? And right now in this market, the way that things are, yeah, things are appraising actually. There's a couple situations that I've had recently where the bank is not even sending an appraiser. So appraisers have expertise in this field. They're educated within the practices of appraising a home properly. They're gonna look at comps, they're gonna look at market conditions and various factors to determine what is the best appraised value. So knowing that, and knowing that appraisers have this expertise, and maybe looking at the market conditions and being like, maybe it is a little bit high, we're going a little too high, it might not appraise. By you putting in your initial offer $5,000, $10,000, whatever you feel comfortable with, then that could put your offer potentially in the best light. Okay, so like I said up front, there's three major buckets of kind of a sale as it makes its way down, how to sell a home or how a home sells. Right? We talked about that initial offer and getting that initial offer in. The second phase, or the second big chunk where negotiation can happen again, where the sale of the home has to happen, is the inspection phase. But then the third phase is this appraisal phase. And you know, you've gotten really far down the path. You've passed the inspection, you're now in underwriting if you have a loan, and the bank is going to send an appraiser. So you're getting even closer to that closing table, and this is where you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons. Like, as a seller, what if it does under appraise? What are you willing to do? And if you're a buyer, what if it under appraises? What are you willing to do as well? And so there has to be this delicate dance of negotiation that could potentially happen at this phase. Because ultimately you have to decide, if you're a seller, are you willing to let the deal die since you're getting so much closer to that closing table? And the same holds true for you as a buyer as well. And if you're not necessarily willing to possibly work together, even though you've gotten pretty far down the path, you know, as a buyer, you've shelled out money. You've shelled out money for the appraisal, for the inspection. Is it worth walking away? Or is there some common ground between you and the seller that you can reach so that you can get to the closing table? And if you're a seller, then are you willing to walk away as well, put it back on the market, remarket it, have more people come through your home? Or is it worth trying to find some common ground someplace? So yeah, it could be a little stressful if something doesn't appraise. Like, what can you do at that phase? If you're in the appraisal phase and it doesn't appraise, it actually underappraises, what are your options? First thing I'd recommend is talking to your lender. Depending on what the house actually appraises for, you might have some opportunity to actually take that difference in cash or money and put it back into your loan. So definitely talk to your lender. It might be possible. The next possibility is the seller actually willing just to come down to the appraised value? The next option could be, could you and the seller meet halfway? So if it's $10,000, let's say under appraised $10,000, you've got $10,000 to work with. Could you both meet in the middle and say, I'll give 5, you give 5, right? That could potentially just make the deal continue to get you both to the closing table. And if there is some resistance there and maybe there's not some common ground that's reached, are you as a buyer, how are you feeling with risk? Are you willing to put a little bit more cash into the deal in the appraisal process to make the deal happen? Okay, another option that you could do is to actually challenge the appraisal. And honestly, challenging an appraisal, it's a little bit more complex. It really could take a while. And sometimes the appraiser could just say, nope, this is the way it is, right? So again, an appraiser has expertise. They've been educated in all the processes and the steps necessary to properly appraise a home. The buyer's agent and the listing agent can go back and forth and provide some comps and some other sales that have happened in the market to try to justify the actual offer price. Does this always work? Does this always happen? Not necessarily. You might get pushback from the appraiser, and it just might take up some unnecessary time that you might not need or want in this deal. Another option could be to work with another lender, but that takes time and money. You've already paid for this one appraisal with this lender. You're already in underwriting. So you want to find out through your attorney if that's something that you want to do, like what are the risks if you were to look for another lender? And is it worth it? There's no guarantee that that other appraisal is going to come up any differently. And also, if you're a seller, do you want that to even happen? Would you be willing to accommodate that if a buyer wanted to take that approach? Maybe not. Maybe you're on a timeline as a seller and you got to get out of here, right? So that's another huge factor, is motivations on both sides. Then the final option really could be maybe you just walk away. If you as a seller are not willing to budge, you think your home is worth more, and you say, you know what, I'm going to put it back on the market. That's fine. Maybe I can get a cash buyer and we don't have to deal with an appraisal. Or if you're a buyer and you're kind of annoyed, maybe you're annoyed that they're not willing to work with you and you've been trying to work with them. I mean, listen, this happens. It's a deal, it's emotions, it's all of it. It's part of a negotiation. Always talk to your attorney, right? We use attorneys here in New Jersey. Talk to your attorney, find out what the risks are. You've shelled out some money already for the appraisal and the inspection. You're pretty close to that closing table. Is it worth it? It's a shame to kind of throw out all that money, especially being so close, and then maybe it doesn't happen. Does it happen? Absolutely. Can a deal die? Absolutely. But try to keep it going. Can you try to keep it going and everybody's happy? All right, so there you go, some information on home appraisals. And if home appraisals come in lower, what are your options as a seller? And what are your options as a buyer? Could be a little nerve-wracking in this whole process if a house does not appraise. And don't freak out immediately. That's why you have an attorney. That's why you have agent representation to help you through the process. And if you've had those ongoing discussions throughout the transaction, even prior to the transaction, you've kind of weighed your risks and understand how much you're willing to budge and what you're willing to do. But don't freak out. There's options, right? And if this does not happen and it doesn't go through and you can't come to some agreement, there's always another house. I know that's easier said than done, but it's true. I always try to take it like, you know what? It wasn't meant to be, and maybe it wasn't meant to be. Pros and cons and risk tolerance are really, really critical to think through as you're going through this whole purchase or selling process. And so if a home doesn't appraise, well, there's options that we talked through today. And so if you want to talk about those options more, you might have questions on real estate here in Northern New Jersey and Bergen County, New Jersey, or you just want to ask some questions, go ahead and reach out. My information is below. I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you have. So again, I'm Bob Dzienis with eXp Realty here in Bergen County in Northern New Jersey. So I want to thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you next week with my next video.